Okay, so we're going to look at assignment 1.2 real quick. Mr. Brown has included instructional videos that go over all these concepts, but I do want to go over a few of the questions. Number 1, absolute value of x minus 3 plus 4. The key to doing this assignment is to understand this concept that I'm about ready to talk about. So I'm going to write that over. Absolute value of x minus 3 plus 4. First thing I'm going to tell you, ignore this number for just 1 second. If I act like the minus 3 is not there and I act like the plus 4 is not there, I am going to get this function right here. Absolute value of x. Okay? So what I did is I ignored this minus 3 and plus 4 for just a second. I get the absolute value of x. If I were to graph the absolute value of x, it would look like this. Okay? You just got to memorize that. Absolute value of x looks like that. Now, once you understand that the absolute value of x looks like this, these two numbers right here, that minus 3 and that plus 4, are going to shift that graph around. And here's how they're going to shift them. One of the numbers, either the minus 3 or the plus 4, is going to move it up and down. The other number is going to move left or right. I'm going to tell you right now, this number inside of the absolute value, that minus 3, is going to move it left or right. The minus 3 moves it left or right. Well, it's a minus 3. You think it would go left, but this one works opposite of the way you think it would work. You think it goes left 3, it actually goes right 3. So if it's a minus, that moves it right 3. So this graph, that whole entire graph, is going to shift right 3. The number outside of the absolute value shifts it up or down. This one works exactly the way you think it should. If it's a plus, it takes your graph and moves it up 4. If it's a minus, it takes your graph and moves it down 4. Okay? So again, this number moves it left or right. If it's a minus, it moves it right. If it's a plus, it moves it left. This number moves the graph up and down. If it's a plus, it is up. If it's a minus, it is down. So let's go ahead and draw our new graph based upon what I just said. Okay, so we're looking at this graph, and we know that we got to shift it right 3 and up 4. Okay, right 3 and up 4. Right 3 and up 4. And if I do that, I am going to get a graph looks like this. Okay, so I shifted it right 3. I shifted it up 4. And if you look at your answer choices, the one that matches that is the third one, which is C. Okay, now let's go down to number 2. Number 2 is the same concept. It's just a different function. It's the absolute value of x plus 3 plus 2. Well, you know that number inside the absolute value, that 3 moves it left and right. If it is a plus, it moves it left. So that is left 3. You know the number outside the absolute value. The 2 moves it up or down. It's a plus 2, so it moves it up 2. That is your answer. It moves it left 3, up 2. Number 3. Same concept. We're looking at negative absolute value of x minus 5 plus 1. We know what the minus 5 and the plus 1 do. The minus 5 moves it right 5. The plus 1 moves it up 1. So again, that's right 5, up 1. But what does that minus do out front? You see how, and I'm looking at this one right here. You see that minus out front? That minus reflects it over the x-axis. Okay, Okay, so if you see a negative number in front of your absolute value, it's going to take your graph and it's going to flip it over the x-axis. So that transformation is going to flip it over the x-axis, shift it right 5, and it's going to shift it up 1. And there's a specific order that's going to happen. It's going to start by flipping it over the x-axis. Then it's going to move that right 5. And finally, it's going to shift that whole thing up 1. Okay? And let's see what we got here. Number 4, same concept. 3 plus absolute value of x minus 4. They just flipped the 3 and they put it out front. You know, we're used to seeing it like this, where it's at the end. They just took that number outside the absolute value and put it out front, but it doesn't change anything. The number inside the absolute value, the minus 4, we know the number inside the absolute value shifts it left or right. So that minus 4 is going to shift it right 4. Remember, if it's minus 4, that's right 4. The number outside the absolute value, the 3, is going to shift it up or down. That's a positive 3, so it's going to shift it up 3. So that's right 4, up 3. Number 5. Here we got to figure out what this graph looks like. And I'll probably stop here because I think I've covered the concepts necessary to answer. I'll do the next one too because it shows one new concept. So let's look at 5. Let me get a new screen over here. There we go. So I'm looking at, let's see. Is this it? Yep. I'm looking at negative absolute value of x plus 2 plus 3. And I got to figure out how does it shift. Remember, we ignore the plus 2, we ignore the plus 3, and we also ignore this negative. You're always looking at this graph, absolute value of x. Okay, and we're going to figure out how all of this, the 2 and the 3 and this negative, shift this graph around. Well, we already know what the 2 and the 3 are going to do. The 3 is going to move up, the 2 is going to move it left, so that's going to be left 2, up 3. And we even know what this negative is going to do. It's going to flip it over the x-axis. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw our new graph. So let me get my yellow pen. There we go. So I got my graph. Okay, remember this is the absolute value of x. This is the graph that will be shifted around. Well, we're going to start by flipping it over the x-axis because that's what that negative right there tells you to do. So I'm going to flip this graph over the x-axis. Okay, and then I'm going to move it left 2 because that's what that 2 tells you to do. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to move it left 2. I'm going to take that bottom graph and move it left 2 and up 3. Left 2 and up 3. And if I were to graph that, I know it's getting a little messy here and I do apologize for that. But if I was to graph that, it would look something like this. Okay, I just took this graph down here. I moved it left. I moved it up. And that's what I get. This graph right here. And if you look at it, B shows that transformation. So B is the answer to that. Finally, 6 does show a new concept. So I do want to go over 6. It says, how does the graph of 4 times absolute value of x differ from the absolute value of x? And this is pretty much the last concept that I need to show you. Let's see, let me get a new screen. Okay. So it says, I have the absolute value of x. How does this change the absolute value of x? You see a number outside your absolute value, it shrinks or stretches the graph. Shrinks or stretches. If the number is above 1 and 4 is greater than 1, it's going to stretch it. Okay? So this is a stretch. If the number were less than 1, let's say for example it was 1/3 the absolute value of x, that's going to be a shrink. So it's going to, or a compression. It's going to, I'm not sure what Mr. Brown called it, but it's a compression. And this one's a stretch. If it's greater than 1, it is a stretch. If it is less than 1, it is a shrink or a compression. Let me see. I'm going to make sure I covered all the concepts. I believe I have. Okay? So you should be able to go through the rest of this assignment based on what I've talked about so far. Answer those questions.